Rob Fisher.
Thanks very much, Charles. We appreciate it, man. You know, I'm just humbled to be at the greatest human conference for humans in Colorado Springs. Humbled and honored. My name is Rob Fisher. First off, how many of y'all have either seen me speak before or never have? I just need to know who's going to be confused. So again, as Charles said, I've been coming to this conference for 25 years since it was a few people sitting around a table. I think there are about 8 of us, and we looked at each other and said, I wonder if other people need to know this stuff, or I wonder if we can learn from other people. And it's kind of grown into this. Charles, why didn't you warn me about the clicker? So I own a company called Fisher Improvement Technologies. We've spent the last 30 years helping organizations and individuals understand how and why people make mistakes, especially mistakes could be catastrophic. And there's only 3 things you can do with a mistake or an error. You can prevent some, you can reduce their probability, or you can mitigate their consequences. That's what makes human and organizational performance so simple. All right, so your 9 o'clock speaker should be coming up next. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how far we've come. And to do that, you need a little bit of history of us. So again, we've been around for about 25 years. We operate in about 40 countries and 12 different languages. So this isn't something that's local to you. The understanding of how this works, it works exactly the same in the researchers at the Department of Energy lab as it does in the jungles of Brazil. Exactly the same, because we're dealing with people and the predictability and the understanding of people. We've had probably 350,000 educated workforce over the years. But more importantly, we've got over 1.2 million data points on how different personalities see and manage risk differently. I thought that was a pretty good number. Does that sound like a pretty good number of data points? Till the HubSpot guy said he had 11,400 trillion. And I said, man, I don't know if I got enough data. But I'm hoping you'll listen for some nuggets. And my hope is that you're not here just because of what you know. I come here to learn. It's my week to absorb. And I try to convey some of the things I've learned over the years here. So I hope you're really here because of some of the things that you suspect you may not know. And that may be a good way to talk to the folks in your organization. Very quickly, what do these 2 things have in common? A hummingbird and a bumblebee. And you could shout out a bunch of things. They both fly. What was that? Yeah, they're pollinators. One of the things about their flight is they have flown for millions of years without us understanding how they did it. The physics of their flight had nothing to do with us understanding it. But once we understood it, we could create vehicles that could lift 100 or 1,000 times their own weight. We as humans have been around for a long time. And that's the way human and organizational performance is. You know, when James Reason started really putting things together, post 3 Mile Island, post Chernobyl, post Deming starting to write some of his principles, when they started putting that together, we started really understanding how we are as humans. That wasn't that long ago. But now we understand so much. We have come so far in that understanding that each year this group gathers together, we know more than we knew the year before. So I'm going to take you a little bit on that journey. And there's 2 odd starts to it. The first start to that journey is, how many of you know somebody with a really fiery personality? How many of you know somebody like that? How many of you know somebody that is really down to earth? All right. How about people that are calm and cool as water? You know people like that? Anybody know somebody that's squirrel? Oh, I'm sorry. In the hot world, we call that easily distracted. You know, we've got over 3,000 years from the ancient Asian cultures of knowing that our personality tendencies are a little bit different. that we have different personality tendencies, and we need to pay attention a little bit to those. We've learned more about humans and what drives their behaviors in the last 100 years than we learned in the last 1,000 generations. It's almost moving at the same. How many of y'all have seen that technology curve where technology continues to double and triple and quadruple every year? That's the way it is, 1975. You see those curves, but you don't realize that it's the same about humans. And if that's the same about humans, it's the same about the field that we're in, this human performance, human factors, human element, HPI, HPES, human error reduction, or HOP, or I don't know what you're going to call it next year. We'll just tack it onto the conference and do that. Okay. But I will tell you this, the fundamentals of all of those things haven't changed. They haven't. I've been there watching it, right? So let me take you back a little bit more to my start because it matters to me. I'm a Cherokee Indian, voting member of the tribe. My family owned about 3,000 acres in Gwinnett, Georgia. Where are you Atlanta folks? How is that pretty good territory right now, Gwinnett? Yeah, it's pretty nice. We thought so. We had about 35 family members that were involved in that 3,000 acres that we farmed. And in about May of June 1838, some soldiers showed up and said, "Pack your bags, we're going on a walk." So they trucked us over to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then that family, 35 of us, started on a journey that took multiple months. And when we got over to Oklahoma, there were 5 left. I didn't think this was going to happen. One of those is my great-grandmother. My dad was born on the Cherokee Reservation. And that matters because the 5 of those that showed up all came from one set of parents back there in Georgia. And my dad's leg was one of those. And if you've been around for a while, the leg right next to him, the cousin, produced a young fella called Walt Garrison, who plays for some team in Dallas, played for some team in Dallas. And the other leg has a guy with an airport named after him named Will Rogers. That was, and then the leg that got me. So, you know, 2 out of 5 ain't bad. But I share that because sometimes it's about this journey. We have to get someplace, and then we've got to do something where we're at. And I've always got to thank my dad. By the way, he's down in the Houston area, 88 and still kicking, still going at it, you know. But there were decades when I didn't pay any attention at all to our heritage or what got us there. And Dad would always think about that because he was born on the reservation. But he was also the first Indian, first Native American to be born in the White Hospital in Fort Gibson. His parents and grandparents owned the first mixed restaurant in Fort Gibson. And that started to shape a spirit of entrepreneurism that we didn't even know existed. And I certainly didn't know existed, but that got squashed a little bit in me because while I was at school, I went to Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas. They tell me I had a very good time. From what I remember, they're right. It was 1975. I'll just say no more. And they called me, and my mother passed away as the result of a medical error. And I was pissed. And I stayed pissed for a long time. So I was mad about that. Who was I mad at? The doctors, the nurses, the medical. Man, I was really mad when we still got the bill. And you know, this is before insurance for these things. My dad's trying to figure out, okay, how do I raise 3 kids? I had to quit school and go home and raise my brother. Some of y'all met Ray. this week. Ray is my youngest brother. He was 6 when this happened. And I tell you that because that part of me that was so pissed off that these doctors killed my mother never had anything but blame for them. But I also watched the extended pain for my father and my brothers. Can you guys relate to that when there's fatalities, serious life-altering injuries in your workplace? That's what the families went through. And so I was leading my life that way. And then I got to thinking about things. This human performance thing came along. It started changing the way I looked at things. And now I realize that almost any worthwhile journey has explorers. You got to have people out there looking for something new. Everything they find ain't great, but they're out there looking for something that's new. One thing about explorers is their families don't know them very well because they're always off doing what? Exploring. It's usually not for them, it's for the greater good. Then you've got pioneers. These are people that follow the explorers and they really take what the explorers found and said, that'd be a good place. Let's figure this out. We know there's going to be some pain. We know there's going to be some wild journeys. We know that we have to, get out there and be on our own, and there's not going to be any support, but we're really still going to be out there leading this charge. And then you've got settlers. Now, the settlers are vitally important. They're important because they create the infrastructure under which success happens. These are the folks that don't go out and try and find a new thing every week. They don't go try and find the next shiny object. They take what's there and they dig that soil and they put in the pipes and they set it up so that the residents can have a good life. Folks, the hop journey is just like that. You have people out there that are out there on the cutting and bleeding edge sometimes. You've got those pioneers that are trying to put all that stuff together. You've got settlers that if you look around the room, there's a bunch of people in the room that have really just made this work so that the rest of us can say, I know I can do that. 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 I don't have to spend all of my time trying to be out there creating something new. Does that make sense to everybody? It's a little bit of the hop journey. But each of these has a really important role in how we impact people. So just for a second, if you wouldn't mind, I know Charles been having you stand up, sit down, fight. If this is your first conference, please stand up. Let's give those folks a hand. Stay standing for just a minute, okay? For those of you that this is your first conference, we are honored that you chose to come here. And we hope you take away those nuggets. But please find someone that has been around for a while, connect with them away from here, and try to understand what role they're playing. This looks about 50% of the room is new. That gives me chills because it means that it's starting to get out there. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate your attendance. So now I'm going to go off on how far we've come. This will be available after the fact, so you can take notes or not take notes. I kind of set it up so that if you want to take pictures of slides, you can take pictures of them. But I'm going to caption each with a how far I think we've come. Now, what you're going to do is say, wait a minute, we haven't come that far. And that's good because this is going to become the list of where you can target in certain areas, okay? The first one is we've really taken a need for systems thinking. We had to spend probably, 15 years plus, Tony, convincing people that they need to be systems thinkers, right? And that was from people who were pretty much naturally systems thinkers. That's what we did, right, Chris? So we had to convince people that this is the right thing. But once we figured that out, we also figured out that we've driven our understanding to risk and controls at the task level. And you heard somebody talk about that. I think it was Mike talk about that yesterday, or the day before, that you have to use something like a task-based system, because people fail on tasks. They don't fail and succeed on jobs and occupations. And on that task, we have individual drivers and we've got systemic drivers. The way we are impacted on that task has a lot to do with our personality tendencies. I know some of you have experienced this before, but let's just check it. On any given task at any given time, we're surrounded by other people, programs, processes, work environments, organization, equipment. Those are all dynamic elements of a task. They all move, they all impact each other, they all impact the individual, individual impacts all of them. So I want you to think in your brain, which of these elements, people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, equipment, which does your brain tend to migrate towards first? Not the one you're supposed to say, the one your brain says, I tend to see that one first, naturally. You got it in your head? On the count of three, I just want you to yell out which one it is: people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, or equipment. Ready? 1, 2, 3. What'd you hear? You heard a little bit of everything. What that tells you is that we will naturally see risk coming from a system, from certain places. But what if it's not coming from that place? How do we teach people to look for risk, look for hazards, for controls that are needed in an area that they don't naturally see? It's why the person standing right next to you may see that risk completely differently, okay? So we've driven that understanding down, and the more advanced organizations are doing pre-task briefings, especially for high hazard tasks. It's great, keep doing pre-job briefs, but they're this big thing that is kind of standard. A pre-task brief is about this person on this task at this time. And by the way, if you go back to the research, that's where it comes from. We will handle tasks differently. And now we know that. We pay a lot more attention to the human brain today than we used to. I mean, Tony and I, when we were doing this back in the 1600s, so like, I don't know, neutrons were made out of wood. It was, submarines had screen doors. It was a long time ago. But what I mean by that is one of the areas that we pay attention to the brain is just what I was talking about, the personality tendency attributes, or the way we tend to look at things, the way we like to hear things. I have a code up here that if you want to know yours, go to that website, take the personality diversity indicator. It takes about, depending on your personality, 15 minutes or a little bit more. I sat on a lady with the plane, says, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to take that. And 2.5 hours later, after she'd hit every single information button to answer the questions. But if you type in that fit special basic as a code, then you'll get a free, basic report for you. Learn to know yourself. Once you learn to know yourself, you can start to manage those tendencies. We know that about our brain, that it's fixed in one way, but it can be manipulated. The second one, shameless marketing alert, is mental models. We know more about our mental models now. What a great piece of research that Rasmussen and Jensen did in the 1960s and 70s, and Swain did in the 80s, right? Those were great. They gave us gems. How many of y'all heard of general error modeling system? They gave us that. It was good information. Now we know how to practically apply it. When Daniel Kahneman wrote the book, who would have known, who would have thought that an economist would write a book that would change the way we do human and organizational performance? Or you look around the room, we come from all different backgrounds. But in that time, he wrote that book on System 1 and System 2. We just have to be able to practically apply it. Some of you may have seen this before, but I would like for each of you to take your dominant hand and hold it up in a fist. Now, why do you think I chose for you to hold up your dominant hand? Because that represents your nature, right? This is what you're going to do automatically. This also can represent that limbic region of your brain. So when you're explaining System 1 and System 2 to people, think about it from a physical aspect. This is the fast part of your brain, System 1. The lazy part, stuff gets in there and it pounds around millions of times and you don't even know it's happening. I want you to take your non-dominant hand and just put it right over like this. That's what Dr. Acosta was talking about that limbic region, this is the limbic, that prefrontal cortex. This is the slow part of your brain, system 2. What we want people to do is push things from system 1 to system 2. The problem is your brain doesn't work that way. Once it gets here, you can put your hands down now, thank you. Once it gets here in this limbic region, it doesn't want to leave because our brains are naturally lazy. You have to force something from system 1 to system 2. And you can picture that with people that say, look, you can drive along in your car and you can check your mirrors, or you can look at your watch, and 15 seconds later, you check your mirrors because you don't remember what you saw, and you check your watch again, right? That's system 1. I want you to remember this, and there's a lot of other information out there, but if you are taking notes, remember this. All skill-based performance mode is system 1, but all system 1 is not skill-based performance mode. How many of y'all have struggled with skill-based performance mode and your workforce and them confusing it, even your leaders, with skill-based performance mode, the science-based mental model, and skill of the craft? How many of y'all's, right? We have to be able to explain that. Skill-based performance mode isn't skill of the craft. So we know that now. We pay more attention to the socio-technical aspects of performance now because of all these things that we now know. And rarely when we're out there, I mean, it used to be, and Tony, I'm sorry I keep calling on you, but we used to hear this, I ain't into that warm and fuzzy stuff every time we walked in a room, right? You don't hear that much anymore. Folks, that's a hurdle. That means the journey's working. And if they say it, at least they say it under their breath, right, James? I mean, warm, fuzzy stuff. I don't do that stuff, right? So we now have these socio-technical attributes built into what we know as human and organizational performance. Next thing we do is we engage leaders to drive improvement. First thing, everything starts with leader knowledge. You have to sit down with leaders and have a conversation about what they know, what they don't know. You have to understand their paradigm before you can ask them to change their language and behaviors. And if you don't get leaders to change their knowledge, language, and behaviors, stop whatever you're doing until you can do that, because everything is going to spawn from that. But I want you to notice in this model, this machine that drives improvement, those are connected through a belt, not a direct connection. Now that belt can be too tight and you get an inefficient machine. Leaders are on you all the time because that belt is engagement. Or it can be too loose and you don't get the transfer of energy, the transfer of culture that you want. Because in the end, we want this workforce to change. They're the ones that are getting hurt, maimed, and killed. They're the ones that we think aren't following procedures. They're the ones that we think are doing things at risk. So they're the ones that we think need language and behavior changes. They probably do, but you got to figure out how to drive it to get those better outcomes. Now, the better outcomes can be physical, but they can also be cultural. How do we work it within our values? What are our norms? So if you think about that, if you want to change somebody's paradigm, you have to give them a paradigm more powerful than the one you're asking them to leave. We miss this sometimes. We say that we can tell you something and you should push your I believe button. That doesn't even work in trust models. We really eloquently mix the science, research, practical application all together in the way we do things like human and organizational performance to get sustainable outcomes. There's a very eloquent mix there. It's practical application. But if the leaders don't change their paradigms, they're not going to change their behaviors. And then the organization is not going to change their processes, values, and norms. It's just not going to happen. How many of y'all have seen in an organization that they bring a new leader in to make change, but the only change they make is how accountable they're going to try to hold people? Y'all seen that before? And it still hasn't worked. So we have to understand what paradigms we're asking people to make, because culture changes one behavior at a time. Another thing Martha said yesterday. And the things that drive a culture change are leader behaviors. I even suggest you don't go after a culture change. You go after the leader language and behaviors. Well, let me ask you this for the leaders in the room. Do you want your workforce to behave well, do the right things, follow processes, follow models? Do y'all want them to do that? Then you have to have your leadership team doing it. And it's got to be visible. People have to see it. We've come so far, we actually have a set of defined principles that can be used anywhere. Heck, there's a whole book on it, right? Todd put this stuff together. I don't care whether you agree or disagree with some of them. It doesn't matter. It's there and it can be used consistently. So embrace what we have. We've really moved from the physics of safety to managing things around safety. Safety, certainly, safety is always going to be about the physics. Fair enough? But it's also about those socio-technical areas. We no longer believe that error is normal, is really trying to say, we need to normalize error. All error is okay. Mistakes, they're fine. Even if they're bad, no problem. That's not what error is normal is saying. It's not what it was ever intended to say. You're not trying to normalize error. You're really trying to understand how that fits into the creation of an error-tolerant system. Is that all right? Charles, you should have warned me about the clicker. No one else had trouble with the clicker until me. You see, we now know that human organizational performance is never about shifting blame. For those of you who have been around and doing this for a while, you probably remember that every time we would walk into or out of a leadership meeting, somebody in the management team would say, all right, so let me get this straight, Honcho. We can't blame the worker no more. So what used to be the worker's problems, now mine. That's what you got out of our last 4 hours together. But here's what we know now. Blame. I want to give you a little bit different paradigm. How many of y'all have heard of the term blame culture? Everybody's heard of that, right? What if I asked you to flush that out of your system and think about blame as a human nature characteristic that's in all of us? What many of you may or may not know is when James Reason wrote Human Error, he started with the belief that our human ego got in the way, right? It can't be me, so it must be you. I'm going to write a book and do some research around that thing. Y'all probably didn't know that blame was a piece of why Human Error got written. That's why we're in this room together. Yeah, we know that it started with a journey that nobody wanted to take from some incidents, but now we're really getting into it. What if blame is a human nature characteristic that can be managed just like our personality tendency and just like the error traps? What if blame's the 11th error trap? And I can push my pause button when I think I'm supposed to blame somebody and back up just long enough. So I let that need to blame, that instantaneous need to blame go by, and then I can really get into the systemic approach. What if that's true? Instead of, oh, we've got a blame culture. It's a big ship. It's going to take a long time to turn. I don't know how we'll ever get these 141 facilities out there across the country to not blame. I know how you get them to not blame. Teach them that blame is a human nature characteristic. It's the 11th error trap and it can be managed, and boom. I've seen organizations stop blaming in a day because the leaders, their language and behaviors matched this thing that we now know. We've moved forward from just empowering to enabling. It was great. We started, how many of y'all remember like the 90s and 2000s, empowerment was this big thing, right? We've empowered people. That's great, but what if you haven't enabled them? How many of you think it's reasonable to believe that different people with different personalities treat empowerment differently? You may have Ron White's a comedian. Probably shouldn't listen to him, but He said, I got thrown out of a bar in New York City, and the police were going to arrest me. And they told me I had the right to remain silent, but I didn't have the ability. If you empower somebody to do something, but they don't have the ability, the empowerment doesn't mean anything. So I stop work authority was a pretty good idea, right? Charles, why didn't you tell me that the clicker was going to be a problem? At least I'm only blaming one person. So we've moved beyond just using stop work authority to using things like start work when safe and stop and seek out help. I've gone into factories with a couple of people here that we put up those stop signs, right? Right, Bob? Put them up, and they brainstormed when we would need to stop work criteria, pre-task brief. We figure out, here's the criteria under which we're going to stop this in advance, because we get all frothed up in the task. And then we don't see that thing that we had in our head. But when you talk about it out loud, then everybody's got an opportunity to see it. We know that if leaders use models and processes, workers will use models and processes and tools. And if leaders won't use models, processes, and tools, neither will the workers. We know that unequivocally. When leaders start using models, processes, and tools in front of the workers, they are acknowledging and driving the behaviors that they want modeled for the workers to use. Too many organizations in the past threw the tools out to the workers because they were trying to change the worker behaviors, but the leaders didn't have any tools like the essential leadership cycle. So the essential leadership cycle says, the leaders have this whole big organization of improvement. And that cycle has some driving elements, self and team awareness. I understand myself. I understand my team. I understand the personality differences and similarities on that team. And I'm aware of the team. How many of y'all have ever worked for an organization that got a culture survey or an engagement survey of some kind, and it came up that the organization had low engagement scores and low trust scores? How many of y'all have seen? How many of y'all, the organization was surprised by it, the leaders? That's because we tend to look at trust not as a resultant condition, but as this thing that we can control. Did you know that 2 of the 4 major personality types believe that I should be able to say, trust me, and you should trust me until I prove otherwise? But I know it got quiet in here on that, because 2 of the 4 personality types say, if you do that, you're probably trying to hide something, and I'm not going to trust you at all until you prove it. And that may be never, because it's going to be harder now. Folks, all that mix of people are in your organizations. So anytime somebody says, trust me or believe me, you got a 50-50 shot that you even got a dog in the hunt with them doing that. And then we've got diversity and inclusion. How many of y'all have this, are on this big D&I thing? You got diversity and inclusion. Yeah, we put it in our values. We do. Here's one thing I want you to remember about diversity and inclusion. Diversity is a fact. It is a condition. Maybe it's about looks. Maybe it's about the way we think. Maybe it's about the way we behave. Maybe it's about our thoughts or our capabilities. Diversity is a condition. Inclusion is an act. It's a choice that we make. Just because I've got them around the table doesn't mean that she feels included. That's work. Diversity is not, we put a lot of work into diversity. Would you guys agree? Guys, gals, would you folks, I don't even know what to say anymore. Would you folks agree that we put a lot of work into diversity, right? Where we need to focus that work after the fact is in inclusion. inclusive by thought, people that have diverse thoughts. Then you can get commitment, but never to a level greater than you as a leader exhibit. Never expect your people to commit to a level great. That's why we say leaders have to drive improvements. They can't support it. If a leader says, I support that, I'm behind that 100%, you're exactly right. That's like being behind the person that's, running in front of you, right? Leaders, you don't want to be, it's not any more work to drive it than it is to support it. So we got to change that paradigm for leaders. I want you to notice where accountability is on this cycle. Where do you think most organizations put accountability on this cycle? Yeah, self and team awareness, going to hold you accountable. Shared vision and values, I'm going to hold you accountable. Clear roles and processes, say it with me. So here's something we've discovered in these 350 plus full-blown deployments we've done around the world. A lot of our clients over the last 4 or 5 years have been highly reliable, pretty resilient, top of their game, wanting to take that next step. And when they come to us, they're really looking for what that next thing is. Here's something I've discovered in conversations with them. They never talk about accountability. You never hear them talk about it. In organizations that struggle with accountability, they talk about it all the time. But if you use a process to develop trust instead of demand it, if you use a process to develop commitment and accountability instead of demand it, then you break away from that having to talk about it all the time to our belief that I'm accountable to you, you're accountable to me, we're accountable to our systems and our models, we're accountable to the organization is accountable to us, and that's the way we all behave. That sounds like a pretty strong accountability culture to me. How about you? But you have to develop it, not demand it. Now, a lot of organizations think, we're back to the whole big ship theory. This does not take a long time at all. And then you start learning the first time and early and before things happen. So using a model and a process, just as an element that you guys can do, I do a podcast on this, but the podcast isn't about me. The podcast is about how leaders from around the world, they're the ones that are being interviewed, have used the essential leadership cycle to change and drive their organizational improvements. That's why we created the podcast, so they could talk about how that works. If leaders don't understand the definitions of error, violation, deviation, active error, latent error, if they don't understand and live those definitions in their language and behaviors, then you are probably going to continue to misdiagnose deviations or errors as violations. You're not gonna, it seems like everybody has this flipped, that 90% of our problem is people out there violating the procedure. No, it ain't. Look, if you don't meet if your organization isn't in the 10-90 rule, 10% of the problems that we have out there are related to some kind of violation, a conscious intent to be outside the rule. But 90% of the things out there are errors and things that the system has some kind of management or control over. If that's not in your senior leaders and managers' mindset, then everybody's going to be violating the rule. And you wonder why you don't get near misses reported. It's because every time somebody has a near miss that may look like they were outside the procedure, you would call it and then they stop giving it to you. It's really a pretty simple paradigm. We now understand that I have had to so manage yelling, admit, every time that pops up on the screen. I just want to yell it in my brain. I've lost what slide I'm on. Let's go back to slide 1 and start over. We understand the impact, and I'm going to call this of a mischaracterization of save your life rules, life-saving rules, cardinal rules, rules to love by or leave by. This whole thing that in the eyes of the workforce was about termination, but in the eyes of the leaders was about saving lives. If you have them, that's fine. It's great. But don't make them rules, right? Make them learnings that we've had, because these things are written in blood. You know, I sat on the board for the International Conference for Fatality and Serious Injury Elimination for years. And that was where it was kind of discovered that the fatalities were flat and the lost work days and TRR and all those other things were trending down well, and that we needed to look at fatalities differently. So we created ways to look at things that have fatality and serious injury potential differently. I'm not of the school that you need to get rid of these. I'm of the school that says, let's take our next logical step in understanding the things that could produce this, okay? It's less about the violation than the punishment than the learning. When we have different sets of rules, so you've got this procedure that does the task that has fatality potential, and then you've got this life-saving rule or save your life rule that's supposed to control that task. If I gave you 2 ways to change the tail light on your truck, and you got to have both of them out there, and one of them's about whether you get electrocuted and the other one's about the physical part of the change, how many of you think that could reasonably be confusing to the field? 3 of you. Good. I thought it would be more. Hey, I appreciate being the start of day 3. My fear was that people would start booking their flights a little bit early, but then I saw that Teresa and some other people are speaking this afternoon. So I know you stay around for this. But think about how we think about labeling, think about language. We labeled these life-saving rules and cardinal rules. Now, the reality is life-saving really kind of means that you're already in the problem. I'm standing there preparing for doing the work. You don't have to save my life at that point. Fair enough. I'm standing on the edge of the pool. But what about preserving life? I can stand on the edge of the pool and make sure I understand what the pool is going to do to me, what the conditions are. I can put the controls in place related to me going in the pool. So you can play with the names, and I want you to write this phrase down and maybe even highlight it. Anything that you do going out of here should be your next logical step on your performance improvement journey. It's your next logical step. You're not going to change anything. You're not going to turn this thing around. You're not going to do anything different. We learned some ways that we screwed up. No, 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 no. We're going to pick some things that become our next logical step in our journey of improvement. So get your phones out, because there's some more QR codes. We've really increased our technological capabilities. And if you got to thank COVID for anything, it was you put a whole bunch of people, pioneers, explorers, and settlers and residents in rooms that they got done what they used to take them 5 days. I mean, if I had to go out to a client, it was 3 days out of my life, fly there, be there, fly home. Now I've got that 3 days for us to think about things. But go to the Community of Human and Organizational Learning's website and go to their learning center. It's continually improving and putting things that you can use in your network. We, a few years ago, put together a pre-task on location free app. So I'm going to put the Apple one up here, and then I'll put the what's the other one? Android one up, okay? What this app does, what supervisors use it for, or the workforce uses it for, is they're used to doing stuff on their phone everywhere except the places you let them or don't let them. All right. So the Ready app comes up and starts asking those questions. Maybe their supervisor's 20 or 30 miles away. And they say, we just want to get somebody to check this. They can hit a button, it saves it to a PDF, and they can email it to their supervisor and get a cross check, or another peer at another wind farm that's gone through something similar. It's a very, very simple app, but all the human performance or hot elements are behind information buttons. So even if they don't know a lot about skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based, to answer the question, they can put it. Even if they don't know a lot about personality changes, they can push it. Even though they don't know what the tools are that they need to use, they can push a button and get it. Very, very simple and free app. There's the Android one for those of you who have Androids. I'll just give you about 10 seconds on that. The next thing that we had the opportunity to do was create this thing we call Fit Online. We've got probably 300 plus pieces of content, most of it split into 2 to 5 minute videos that are all the stuff we've learned over the years about these principles. So let's say so there's one on there, and a lot of them are under these things. So this is the ego thing. They're called Robservations. They made me do it. But there's a Robservation on managing VUCA at the task level. So we can talk about it as a big thing, but the workforce has to manage it there. That's about 5 minutes long. There's a story that's told, and the story is told in the book, about leaving kids in hot cars. There's a story before Christmas that is about Christmas vacation and how to manage air traps at home. There's just a whole range of free things. And what we've now discovered is that supervisors are going on there, signing up for free. Then on Monday morning at their safety meeting, the way they pick their topic is they say, well, which one do I want to talk about? Oh, performance modes. Let's do that one. They hold their phone up, their crew watches a 5-minute video on performance modes, and then says, all right, let's talk about this. We'll take the next 10 minutes to talk about performance modes and what they mean. And the feedback we got was, we realized that if we did that every week, we've done refresher training for HOP without ever having to go to the classroom, because we covered every single topic that was there. So again, there's paid stuff on there. I'm not going to market that stuff. I want you to go there for the free stuff. Charles, did you know that this clicker has problems? This one. I want you to think about your legacy. I've started to think about this a lot. I turned 65 last week. I know it's very difficult for you to believe. But about 5 or 6 years ago, the family was coming and saying, look, this can't stop with you. You've got to create a legacy of the things that we've learned along the way. And I want you to think about your legacy. I want you to think about what you're going to leave. Folks, it's not the people in this room. It is the literally hundreds of thousands of people that you will touch because of what you know, what you say, and what you do. Just some very quick final thoughts. When you tell a story or show a story, don't talk about outcomes. Talk about how we got there. I just cringe when I see these safety professionals post videos of fatalities and wrecks. It just drives me crazy because it refocuses people on outcomes instead of processes and methods. You know, I like to think of human and organizational performance. It used to be we convinced people it didn't need to be a big program. The reality is this stuff is not a program, it's a passion. At any level of the organization. If I'm the seniors, I've seen some CEOs with a passion that is unbelievable, and their organizations are massively successful. But our job is to translate the things we learned this week into the hows, and that may need help. So you're going to have to pick and choose a little bit, okay? You got to figure out how to do some of the things we heard. You got to understand the personalities of the people you're going to be talking to. If you're talking to a doer and you're saying, I've got, you know, these are some of the things we need to think about, they're going to keep asking that question. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then the last thing I want you to take away, and you may want to write this down, is learning does not happen until behaviors change, and they have to change sustainably. That's what you need to watch for. Folks, I'm honored to be here. Just to be asked, I wonder every year if that will happen. I really do. I take this very seriously because I know what's out there and what the potential is. You saw what the potential in medical is. You've seen what the potential is. You know, we used to say at FIT that it's great that we're out there in some of your companies. Wonderful. We love working with you. But 75% of people that die in the workplace are in companies under 100 people. How do we get this to them? I really appreciate your attention. I appreciate your involvement. Charles, thank you so much again for inviting me. I'll be around for a couple of minutes. The book is for sale out there, but I have to run to a senior leader workshop that starts in a few minutes. I'll be here for a couple of minutes. I'd love to meet you and answer any of your questions. And I'm going to turn it back over to Charles. Thank you very, very much.